Today I want to talk about the new Brockhampton album, the final Brockhampton album, The Family. I know there's another album that was released afterwards. I haven't actually listened to that yet, and I heard it's not really, it's more of a collection of tracks that didn't really make it on an album. So I don't know, I didn't really feel the need to listen to it. I'm sure I'll get to it at some point. But this album was kind of what was advertised as the final album, the album where kind of like closure is reached. And for those of you who don't know and haven't listened to it, for those of you who don't know much about the band, I'll tell you about them. They're kind of a rap collective out of Houston who have gained a lot of attention, particularly with teenagers in the past 5 years. And I would say personally, they're a group that had a large impact on me in high school and in college as well, the past 5 years. I was a fan of them when they blew up with the Saturation Trilogy in 2017. And their music definitely played a role in my life during that summer and up to that winter when Saturation 3 came out. Into the following year when I was a freshman in college. Their music really captures teen angst in a way. And as you can tell based on this title, the group showed themselves, they kind of advertised themselves as a family, as like this really tight-knit group. They lived together when they were recording the Saturation Trilogy. I'm not sure after that. And they kind of, their group was just, part of what made the group so great was the passion they had. The passion they had for the music, the passion they had for themselves and for the group as a whole. I love Saturation 2 and 3. I think 1's kind of overrated and very inconsistent, but a lot of great tracks on it. And then after that, following the Saturation Trilogy, we've had 3 albums. Iridescence, which has grown on me a lot. I think there's a lot of great stuff on that, even though it's a little inconsistent. Ginger, which I really don't like. There's some songs I like on it, but honestly, I'm not really a fan of Ginger. I've tried many times to get into it, but... And then the album that came right before this, which was Roadrunner, which I also wasn't really a fan of. Lots of, highlights, but I don't know, felt a lot of it just wasn't for me, I guess. But now, since Roadrunner, there's been a lot of controversy. But the thing is, we don't really know exactly what's been going on. We just know that the group has been falling apart. And actually, I had tickets to go see them last spring, which was around the time where like the group said they were breaking up, and the concert was canceled. And in those initial stages of the group breaking up, I had kind of assumed, I was like, oh, they'll get back together at some point. I mean, they look at all the music they made in like 4 or 5 years. They made like 5 albums in 5 years. Like, they'll definitely get back together and do more stuff, even if they all break out into solo project time. But you know what? After this album, after everything that's happened since then, this is the end in a lot of ways. I would really doubt that this wasn't the end. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about this end for Brockhampton. Well, the problem is that this isn't really a Brockhampton album. This is a Kevin Abstract album. Kevin is the de facto leader of the group, and it's very interesting. I think most people would say he's the leader of the group, but on a group, when you listen to the music, it's not like Kevin is by far the most vocal member of the group, or that he contributes far and beyond the most to the group. It's more like, I don't know, I've always felt it's like Kevin has made himself the leader. He advertised himself as the leader. We don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. I mean, they're supposed to be a group, each with their own influences, contributing a little bit to the overall message. So it feels weird, and honestly, it feels improper for this album to be advertised as the final Brockhampton album when only one member of the group is on it. And we're only getting his perspective, which is fine. There's nothing wrong if it was a Kevin Abstract album, but it just feels a little ingenuine to have this album be called the Brockhampton album when it's just Kevin. So that's a flaw I would say off from the bat. This album, I'm supposed to be kind of, as a fan, it's kind of like this is closure, but it's not really closure if the whole group isn't making an album together. Back and RZA are the kind of 1-2 punch of this album, and they're really great tracks, and they really flow into each other very well. And what I wanted to say off the bat is that I think Kevin's performance when it comes to vocals on this album is really great. His vocals are fantastic. He definitely feels like he's in the best. He's rapping the best he's ever rapped, I would say, on this album. Is primarily in a chipmunk soul style, and I'm laughing because, of course, I'm going to be talking about the connections to Kanye. I mean, this group was built on they came together on a Kanye fan website, I'm pretty sure. And the influence Kanye has had on them is very obvious if you listen to any of their music. So, you can mark that another video where I mentioned Kanye, even though I really don't want to lately. Throwback, but it's also modernized a bit, I would say. You definitely still have sprinkles of what Brockhampton was, so it doesn't feel like they're just taking on a completely new style. The track that comes after that is Gold Teeth, which is okay. This song actually reminds me of a different Kanye era. This reminds me of Jesus King, which I think is interesting because I've never really thought of Jesus King as being stylized enough to have to influence other music, but this song does definitely feel influenced by that album. And I like this track, but I would say there's a section in the middle that is really awkward from Kevin. From Kevin when it comes to his enunciation of what he's saying. But I like the beat overall, and I think it transitions well into like the second half of this song really well. And following Big Teeth was the first teaser track of this album. I'm not going to call it. I'll call it BP. If you want to know what it actually is called, look it up. Try not to curse. And this track is really great too. It starts with like this really interesting experimental jazz sample, and then moves into the chipmunk soul that I was talking about earlier. And Kevin does great on this too. So this middle part of the album kind of has a different sound, and to describe that sound, I don't really know how, because it's kind of like a bland sound. We got the tracks All That, Back from the Road, Basement, Southside, Good Time, which are not very interesting. None of those are really interesting. In particular, All That and Back from the Road are kind of complete throwaways. And there's a little bit sprinkled in on these tracks as far as like lyrics, Kevin talking about the group. He gets slightly more introspective, talking about how sad he is and how he's walking away from his family. I would say for the most part, he kind of sprinkles in talking about the group, even though the album as a whole is about the end of the group. He doesn't get into specifics that often. He talks about how the band, a couple different ways why the band broke up. They all focused on different things, different work ethic styles, clashing of personalities, and kind of like this corporatization of the group. He talks about on a couple songs how, and kind of like the final way he's talking about it is the only one where he takes personal account or personal responsibility for what's happening is when he talks about his issues. He never is really specific about how he has contributed to the group's fall, but he admits partially that something is his fault. He talks about the fact that he reached out to Amir Vaughn, who was a member of the band on the first 3 albums, and then was kicked off because of sexual assault. I'm going to say allegations, but I think they're pretty much confirmed to be true. And that was kind of like, for those of you who don't know, that was kind of like where the band took their biggest hit. Their first big hit from being on the top, just the most exciting group in hip-hop at the time, and then the loss of one of their more prominent members, Amir, really hit them hard. So Kevin is saying that he's been talking to Amir, which, there's obvious reason why that might cause some friction between the remaining members of the group. But besides that, he's not very specific. Kevin talks about how his dependency on alcohol has kind of affected him since they became a big group. He also talks about how that monetization of the group has kind of tainted their aspirations, which I think is interesting. You know, the thing you can say about money is that money is everything until you have it, and that's kind of the perspective Kevin is taking. And I would say the group as a whole, the success kind of tainted their ambitions because it became so much about money, and success ended up meaning monetary success, and kind of pandering to a certain crowd rather than just doing it for themselves. That purity is a kind of what made the first three albums such like a spectacle, so passionate and empowering. But where do you do after you made it? You sang and you acted so long about making it. Where do you go from there? Well, the group as a whole didn't really know. As for the group's breakup itself, I'm going to get a little personal, talk about how I feel about it. As someone who's been a fan and kind of looked up to these guys growing up, despite whatever individual grievances they've had between each other, it's a part of life. Change is a part of life. And I definitely really relate to the group, the idea of this like group dynamic, this family, as the album title says. Because I felt a similar way with my group of friends in high school and college. Kind of like this idea of squeezing and holding on to what's going on so tightly because it gives you a sense of meaning in life. Especially when it comes to people who are dealing with mental illness, such as myself, and as you can see with a lot of the material from these three albums, a lot of the group is also suffering from a lot of mental illness. In a state where you're going through a lot emotionally, I think it's pretty common to kind of take what you had and kind of hold on to it as hard as you can. And because of that, you might feel so unprepared and unstable if something happened to that group. That's how I definitely felt. And the truth is that there always will be something that changes things. You know, change is inevitable. Things are not going to stay the same. And something I was so afraid of, and I think the group was too, was having to accept that. The family, which is mostly just kind of a 1 minute long sung section from Kevin, where he's talking about, please don't let me grow up. I never want to grow up. I want to go back to those times. And I can relate with this too. This perpetual obsession with nostalgia, almost like that the good times have already happened and I got to go back to the good times. The times that memory wise they're going to stick out so much you won't forget them. And if you won't forget them, if they're that prominent in your head, they must be the best times, and everything else pales in comparison, right? That is definitely something that this group has gone through, and seeing them go through that in the same way that I did has been a really powerful situation. And this album is kind of, from Kevin's perspective, acceptance of this idea that it's over, and it's okay that it's over, and that it's gonna, we're gonna move on. The future is going to happen, and it's okay that it's gonna happen. These guys symbolize the teenage years, the angst and passion of teenage years, for a lot of people. So to see them go through this similar change to what we all go through, transitioning from teenage years to adulthood, furthers that connection, I would say. And I think just that in general gives the album a lot of merit to me, because it's got something very relatable. And the thing is, maybe that has nothing to do with the songs themselves. As I said, a lot of these tracks are really just not finished, or not even really tracks. Besides the one I mentioned before, I would say the key tracks come in the second half. 37th Street, which has got a really great soul sample and great hook. And we got the final two tracks, the ending, and the final song, which is just called Brockhampton, where Kevin kind of gives a eulogy for the group, calling out each member and talking about their influence and what he's going to miss about them. And yeah, it is really beautiful to hear him kind of talk about this, and especially on a first listen, it gave me a lot of chills. But on further listens, honestly, it kind of feels sour because it feels like the band is getting a eulogy, but no one else is really talking about it. We don't know anyone else's perspective, just Kevin's. And is it because Kevin is the loudest? I just left with a lot of questions that kind of sour what's supposed to be like, this is the end, this pure ending. Why is Kevin the only one to kind of speak on this? And for one thing, Kevin doesn't really accept much fault in this. He kind of mostly pushes the fault on everybody else. He says, like, man, I want a new... I can't remember which track it was where he says, God, please get me a new band, man. Which I just feel is very dismissive. He mentions occasionally, like, he's like, yeah, I had issues too. I was toxic in a lot of ways, but mostly it's him throwing it on. It's the money's fault. It's everyone's focusing on the fame fault. And you know what? The truth is, it doesn't really matter what the fault is, but the lack of proper perspective from anyone else in the band definitely taints this album in a lot of ways. It doesn't really feel like a Brockhampton album or a final Brockhampton album, definitely not. But maybe it's better to not think about all that, to think about what this album says it is, and what it should be based on what it says it is. When it comes to just listening to the album, front to back, it's got a lot of merit, but it's also just kind of bland in some parts musically. I don't know. I'm mixed on this album, is what I'll say. And mixed on the group as a whole. But the thing is, it's not really about me. It's not really about the fans at all. And I understand how that kind of has played a part in the corruption of this group too. You know, we're spectators on a group of friends falling apart. And that's not usually how it's done. It's kind of like this parasocial thing where people are, you know, I guess it's ironic I'm saying this as someone who is contributing to this parasocial relationship, but we have the perspectives and analysis of people who aren't in the group, which is understandably frustrating for Kevin and the rest of the group on this album and in their public lives. The thing is, no one's making them do this. No one's making them release this album to kind of address the controversy and say goodbye. And the thing is, I guess my personal theory is that no one else really thought that it was necessary, except Kevin. Which is interesting. There's a lot to digest when it comes to that. And maybe that fact is kind of what makes it so that Kevin is, maybe he's commercializing the group the most, you know? He feels the need to make an album to summarize the end of Brockhampton when no one else does. They understand it as it doesn't really matter. Addressing to the fans why the group broke up doesn't really matter to them. Which is just interesting, because as music fans, we kind of think about the music and think about the importance of the music. I've talked about it before, but I think what's more important than music is the importance of the people. And sometimes that importance isn't put in the music. It's not for the music, it's for them. And that's okay. But I don't know, I guess I'm not here to judge personal lives. I can't really know personal lives. I guess I can only judge the music and what it's been given to me. I'm appreciative of the fact that Kevin wants to share and express his feelings. There's nothing wrong with that. And it definitely provides value to me as someone who looks at these things that Kevin's going through and that the group has gone through and uses it to inspire myself to talk about it and to think about my own personal connections to this. It goes back to this idea is like, why is music important? Which is a tough one, I gotta say. But at least for me, I think music's important because it makes us think about ourselves, it makes us think about our own lives, and provides emotion. And I think feeling and thinking, I think they're good. I think they're purely good things to go through. And that's why we experience art, and particularly music. So I appreciate what the band and what this album has done for me in my life. And I appreciate that this album has helped me to kind of think about and address my own closure for the things I've been through and the family that I have in my life. But I guess the most I can say for Kevin and the group is that I hope that closure is expressed better personally than it is on this album. That sounds kind of harsh, but that's, I would say, summarizes my thoughts. I'll come back to some of these tracks, but I think this album fails on providing a holistic finale to the group, in my personal opinion. But yeah, I definitely recommend you guys check out the album yourselves, come to your own conclusions, and maybe you'll like it more than I did, maybe you won't. Have to see. But yeah, one last thing, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please leave a like and subscribe if you liked this video, and a comment too if you have any thoughts. I'd love to hear them. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. I think next up I'm going to be doing end of year lists, which are a big effort. So excited, but also it's going to be a decent amount of work. Hopefully I'll get those out relatively soon. I'll probably do favorite songs and favorite albums. But yeah, hope you guys all have a great day, and I'll see you next time.